Welcome to a word of hope on this 25th Sunday of Ordinary Time. I'm Brother Edward coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin, and today's readings offer us a challenge. In the prophet Isaiah, in the first reading, we read that God says to the people, "Your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways." This leads us right into the gospel of this Sunday, which is the parable of the vineyard workers. In this parable, St. Matthew sets up a situation where we can understand what the prophet Isaiah is challenging us to be. Because in this story, we see a progression of workers entering into a vineyard where they're working with the promise of being paid a just wage. And as the story unfolds in this progression, the end of the day is arriving. It's the 11th hour, the last hour of work, and there are still workers to enter the vineyard, and the vineyard owner invites the workers into his vineyard and promises them to pay them fairly. Interesting that Matthew starts from the beginning, the workers in this progression, but when it comes to paying the workers, he reverses it. And that gives us a little hint in the Semitic mind of telling us that things are going to be different. And so in the paying of the workers, the last is paid the full day's wage. And this progression continues. Each worker, not depending on the hours, is paid the same amount. And finally, those workers who work the whole day, the heat of the day, in this harvest, or have this expectation of being paid much, much more than that 1 hour worker that we saw in the beginning of the paying aspect. But in fact, the vineyard worker gives them the denarius, the day's wage. And they resent this, and they challenge the master of the vineyard and say, "Oh, this is not fair. We worked all day long." And the vineyard worker are coming at this in a very human way. And I think most of us during the story, if we didn't know the ending, would say, I would be expecting more as well. But what Jesus is teaching us through this parable is, again, God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and his ways are not our ways. That God is generous, so much so in his heart that things like how much we do are not factors in to his magnificent generosity. And so we see this resentment rise up in these workers, which in one sense we could say is natural, but it really at the core of it is the vice of envy. Sometimes we read it in the scripture as the evil eye. That is when we are angry that other people are blessed in some way, that somebody got something that we feel we should have gotten ourselves, or we just don't want them to have it. It's a divisive thing within a human being to have that. And so today in today's gospel and in the words of Isaiah, we are asked to examine our own attitudes towards the progress of people. Are we able to rejoice at others' success, others' achievements, others' blessings, because they are part of the abundance of God's generosity? Because no good comes to us without God's blessing behind it. So when we look at today's reading, think of our own situations. When would we be envious of others' good fortune, and bring ourselves into the generosity of God's mentality, which wants all to eat, all to live, all to rejoice, and all to be with him in heaven.